Welcome again to another segment of the People's Food Summit. I'm here with a wonderful friend and colleague from the beautiful country of Kenya. His name is Ferdinand Wafula. Hi, Ferdinand. Hi, Wafula.
Hi, Precious.
Yes. So Ferdinand is an agroecology practitioner and also a farmer based in Western Kenya. The place that he comes from is called Vihiga. I hope I got that right. Yeah. And
That's fine.
Yes, his main work really is in community-based development, agroecological practices, and permaculture frameworks in working with communities. So Ferdinand is going to indulge us today. His organization that he founded is called Biogardening Innovations, which we call BioG mostly. But he's going to indulge us in his journey with BioG and the farmers there in Kenya, including some practices that he's been involved in. And actually, Ferdinand and I are part of the AFSA initiative, where Regeneration International participates in the Healthy Food, Healthy Soil initiative. So I think, Ferdinand, I just think that you have too much to share, and I don't want to waste time introducing you, because we'll get to know a lot more about you when we listen to what you have to share. So you take the floor.
Yeah, much gratitude, Precious, for inviting me to your event, to take part in your event. And it's such an honor to have Precious sister like you. I'm going to share with you some efforts that we are doing with farmers on the bio inputs and seed sovereignty issues. It's all about food and why these efforts matter. And I would just introduce by saying that efforts towards seed and food sovereignty does matter. It does matter a lot because everybody, every human being is connected to food as a consumer. And the glaring evidence on people's health, from chronic diseases to environmental disasters. We're now talking about climate crisis, not climate change, because a change could be either positive or negative, but what we are witnessing is a disaster. It's a crisis. This is enough evidence to call for change in our food system. So we, as an organization, are part of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, and part of the 15 centers. We are one among 15 centers that are doing a healthy soil, healthy food project using ecological-based inputs, popularly called biofertilizers. But within the biofertilizers, we have the bio inputs, what we use as biofertilizers, and also the bioprotectors. And why talk about bio inputs? Why about the ecology? Humans are part of the ecology. We are part of the food chain. And when we get disconnected, when we move away from nature, then it's risky. We caught disaster. And the effects are evident. We were created, depending on which point of view you have, but humans, as part of the ecology, actually eat food that is from nature. It's natural food. And we can see increasing cases of non-communicable diseases in our country, in our continent, and throughout the world, even in the communities that used to consume traditional foods and have changed to foods, junk foods. And all this is related to declining soil fertility as a result of synthetic use of synthetics in form of fertilizers and also in form of bioprotectors. And we shouldn't be, nobody should lie to us about safe use of these synthetics because some of them are systemic and they are poisons. And we just call them synthetics politely, and others call them either pesticides or rodenticides or weed, but they are poisons. The truth of the matter is that they are poisons and they are systemic. They get into our soil and get into our water systems, get into our food, and eventually we're consuming residues of these poisons. That will have an effect, definitely have an effect, and lots of documents have been written and research. And even before that, we're just getting clear evidence from communities who telling us that the cases of high blood pressure, the cases of diabetes, the cases of some forms of cancer they do not understand is on the increase. And get back to ecological processes and food. Our communities, especially in Africa, I had some science and indigenous knowledge. And for instance, fermentation processes have been in existence for a long time, be it in brewing beer or in making bread in other societies. And these were discovered by ancient men and through traditions and through trial and error. And now modern science is giving us some tools to understand these processes and how we can use these processes and even local materials to boost our microbial population. And for instance, when we talk about fermentation and consumption of sour milk, and we are told this is actually lactic bacteria, which produces the lactic acid, which is responsible for the sour taste. And this was all available. This is knowledge that our people had, and just science has given us the tools. And that that type of food that was fermented was good for us. So we can ferment some materials and also generate some of these good bacteria. And these bacteria colonize our bodies. And that is what gives us health. So when we consume the other foods that we've put poison on them, then we kill that bacteria. So in turn, our bodies become weak because the protective bacteria is killed, and we become prone to diseases. And no, we have to restore that. So that is what we are doing. This is the kind of knowledge we are sharing with farmers and other stakeholders, and that we have to restore our soils with beneficial microorganisms, and through these processes, like making biofertilizer. Some of them, like bokashi, include several different types of ingredients, from dry matter, dry cow dung, and charcoal, and some soil, and these are all mixed and fermented for about 2 weeks in an anaerobic or with air, and then it creates a condition where several different types of microorganisms come in, and then when we take that to our soil, then it inoculates the soil. So it restores the lost biodiversity. And again, the science now within the agroecology is telling us that some of these microorganisms are very important in mobilizing nutrients for the plants. And that just gives the plants what I will call the organoleptic properties, that this is now the original, the natural property associated with the growth of these plants. So that when we have our soils inoculated with beneficial bacteria restored, then the plants become more vigor, they grow with a lot of vigor, and therefore eating these types or these plants transfers that vigor into our health, and then we can be able to restore our health. And this is knowledge that has been hidden from the local farmers and local community. So we are having what we call farmer to farmer training of trainers model to be able to share this knowledge, so that we train the TOTs and show them practically how this is happening, and also do some trials, and then they share with their fellow farmers, and also they experiment. And because some of these resources are locally available, as opposed to the synthetics which are produced in the labs, and farmers have very little control and knowledge on how these are produced. So that is one part as far as the soil is concerned, and as far as the biofertilizers are concerned. Now about the seed, the same science applies, and that we can now coat the seeds with bioprotectors and also with the biofertilizers, so that when the seed is germinating, then it has the properties, the association with the microbes that enable the seeds, guard the seeds against pests and diseases, and also enable the seeds to capture moisture from around its surrounding, so that that increases the chances of germination. And the local seeds, the seeds that have been saved by farmers, have these properties. They have got that association with the native microbes, the local microbes. And that property is what gives them the tolerance. And now, when the industry and the multinationals want to promote the hybrids and the genetically engineered crops, they want us to move away from this knowledge, and this is a form of neocolonialism. And what needs to happen is that this knowledge needs to be validated with modern scientific knowledge, and then enhanced. And because farmers are familiar with these indigenous technologies, indigenous knowledge, they have knowledge about their cowpeas, their sorghum, their millet, and how they use them, that will enable them actually define their own food security. And if they have access and rights to save these seeds, then that is very important, and that is what is advocated for and what we advocate for in this agroecology movement. And from the science, now we move to as a movement, because farmers' rights, this is about people's rights, and to have food to eat is a right. And you know, food brings pleasure. So when you deny people pleasure to eat, and this is a very basic pleasure, because you have to survive, and it's food. You can't eat plastics, and you have to survive. And we were created, and with a lot of innovations and creativity. Over time, humans have domesticated a different variety, wide variety of harvests or crops that they can actually depend on, and even animal products they can, and also other related components like pastures, and all this is important. Fruits and all this is very important. So saving this knowledge, validating this knowledge, using this knowledge helps local communities identify with their own local foods, and then the diversity of foods that we have throughout the world. That you know, we say variety is the spice of life. So that is actually what makes us pride. I mean, it gives us the pride, makes us proud of who we are as a people or as a community. And this is just so important, and cannot go without mention that Africa, as the cradle of mankind, has a very wide biodiversity. And the industry, in the push for hybrids and industrially produced seeds, then becomes an agent of loss, biodiversity loss. And we are witnessing that in some reports, up to 800 million people throughout the world are now, I mean, are facing hunger. And Africa is worst affected. And when we learn of the climate crisis, and learn that we have the capacity to use our local resources so that we can be able to overcome some of the climate crisis and adapt. Some of our seeds can be able to adapt. Our food systems can be able to adapt to the changing climate better. And that is a call to action that our governments and our leaders should not put our resources undersell, because doing that would deny the Africans, and especially the third world countries that are facing the brunt of climate crisis under starvation. And we cannot develop as a people when we do not have food, and when we do not design or decide the destiny of our food. And they say that one day it is the stone that was neglected by the builders in the Bible that became the cornerstone of the building. Some of the indigenous germplasms that we have in Africa, the food that we have, and the diversity that we have, maybe this is actually what will save us from hunger and from the diseases and from the many challenges that we have. It's important for our African governments, especially in Africa, to realize and realign development policies and become more responsible towards issues around biodiversity laws and enhance diverse food systems that are locally based. This is the much I can share with you for now, and we'll be able to see some slideshots of some pictures of what we do. And again, much gratitude to Precious and the work that you are doing in the ecosystem and ecology restoration. I think this kind of connection then builds on more knowledge sharing that is important for our people, and especially to grow a fair and just world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ferdinand. Oh my goodness. Such a wealth of knowledge that you shared here. And I honestly would love to just appreciate how much depth you have of the history of the problem and the challenge that we have. The fact that I think before we forget, our local knowledges and local sciences have been taken for granted for a long time. And like you say, that it is coming back as modern science, but really building on the indigenous knowledge systems that existed for years. Another thing that I really gleaned and harvested with so much humility and gratitude is the fact that we sugarcoat, and I'll use the word sugarcoating because I think that's the word, the statement that makes sense. The use of all the synthetic inputs, and we call them synthetics as a way of being kind. But you know, our colleagues, most of them are very have done so much work in this area of pesticides and herbicides and everything that is used, and fertilizers. Even at AFSA and at Regeneration International too, there's even our international director, Andre, has even wrote books on the myths of pesticides and how they poison our children and they're poisoning generations. So the same way, if you have biologically sound inputs or biologically local inputs and microbes, and you use those to grow your own food, you're introducing them back to your gut, back to your system, which the initiative that we are in as in AFSA is very important. Without healthy soil, there is no healthy food. So for the longest of times, we have evolved into eating poisons, unawares or awares, because obviously the knowledge is shared with very high limitation, right? So it's good to have people like you on the ground working with farmers, opening farmers' eyes and, you know, just chatting. But maybe a small question, you know, how has it been reintroducing bio inputs back to the communities?
Yeah, thank you. I think there are two dimensions, and in fact, your comments also remind me of how we are connected to the food chain through even the animals, and that what we eat and what we feed the animals will also what we inject the animals when we're treating them. That also gets into the food system. It's been an awakening call, and there's a lot of evidence from the ground that farmers are seeing. And I'm very happy to share with you that as I speak right now, the county in which we are operating, Vihiga, we're operating in Vihiga and the neighboring county. The agriculture department here, you know, we have a devolved system, and agriculture is one of the devolved sectors. Currently, I'm in a task force that is generating agroecology policy. The county is now, we've already developed a draft 0, and we only have one county that has already launched its agroecology policy. Out of the 47 county, we hope Vihiga is going to be the next. And this has been as a result of a lot of awareness creation and just goodwill also from the local county department. So we are riding on that in order to really open it up. And the local population has been practicing some of the practices, some of the activities by default, because we are a region that produces the best indigenous vegetables and a wide variety of them, because we still, we have an equatorial type of rainforest, and a lot of the biodiversity, especially the leafy vegetables, we still keep them, a lot of them. And in this western region, we still have one of the only surviving rainforest, equatorial rainforest, Kakamega rainforest. And so there's a lot of connection with the biodiversity. And so the local people understand some of the indigenous germplasms, some of the indigenous vegetables, and have preserved them just by default. Of course, it is the official government policy, extension policy, that has kind of eroded some of the lost knowledge. But thank God, we still have some of the custodians, some of the old men and the women who are also sharing this knowledge. So we're doing trainings and integrating some of the young and old and sharing this. And it's not rocket science that if you get to the market, people will prefer to eat spider herb, buy spider herb more than cabbage, because they know that the spider herb, apart from it being food, is also medicine. And cabbage, they know this is just water and doesn't have a lot of nutrients. And even right now, when they're going to the hospitals, there's a lot of emphasis on diet, eating indigenous leafy vegetables and diets, so that this, even the people who work in hospitals are part of people who are in the community. So there's a lot of awakening, knowledge awakening, and even the young people now getting to see what the older people are doing. But there's still a lot that needs to be done, and a lot of knowledge to be shared, a lot of other platforms and tools to use, and also media and all these stakeholders. So there's still a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Ferdinand. I think we'll love to have this playing for the longest time. The depth of knowledge that you have, I mean, we really appreciate having your voice here represented, and also noting that you really jumped on the wagon last minute, and we are so grateful that you could do this. And obviously, I'll be looking forward to getting the pictures, and we will just dot them around and people can have a look while they also listen to your amazing story and knowledge and your voice.
Thank you.
We came up with the word regenerative. It's not a corporate invention. Please don't get mistaken. It's a movement language to continue to talk organic, now as regenerative organic, showing that regeneration is working with the living earth and her regenerative powers of a living soil, living biodiversity. We cannot hand it over to the corporations, because I've read every paper they've published, from the Syngentas to all the others. They use our language about what it is, and then what they're doing is about hyper-industrialism. I don't think if we hand over regenerative, we are strengthening our movement, we are weakening our movement, we're handing over what is ours. Yeah. So we've got to reclaim regenerative, show that it's the same as organic, the same as agroecology, and depending on the circles and the spheres, use the words that are popular in that sphere. But don't give up regenerative, define it more deeply.
This is a global farmers' revolution. It has not been hijacked by Syngenta or Bayer. I know that because I'm on the front line. They're trying to. We always knew this day would come, right from the beginning, because we saw the way they, we've got industrial organic in the US, and that's divided the whole organic movement, despite the fact there's standards and certification. We've seen a similar thing here in Europe with agroecology, and agroecology put out by the French government, for instance, which is business as usual with a light wash of green. They're experts at hijacking, and we knew as soon as we became successful, they would want to hijack us. That's a sign of success. That's a sign that we're a threat. Now, very importantly, the opposite of regenerative is degenerative, and by definition, any agricultural system or any system that degenerates is not regenerative. We actually need to regenerate our biodiversity, our democracy. In other words, we start talking about the bigger picture of regeneration. It's not just farming and soils. It's people and planet.
While pests and disease are universal challenges for farmers, not all pest management approaches are desirable. There is growing awareness about the harm insecticide and fungicide can cause the people who use them, as well as the negative impact those poisons can have on local biodiversity. High costs are also a factor for many small farmers. We have worked with farmers in FRN for some few years back now. We all looked at botanicals as the alternative to synthetic chemicals. We did some experiments, and in the course of learning FRN principles, we gradually come together having similar focusing of looking at botanicals and other options than chemicals as desirable. We made a video on botanicals and on how to make them. And we also made another video on experiences of FRN in our projects area. For this year 2021, the needs for alternative solutions to commercial insecticide led local farmers to experiment with creative methods. This collaborative process began with a series of farmers' meetings where the group collectively decided which botanicals and non-botanicals to test during seasons. Demo plots and farmer plots were chosen, and all participant farmers agreed to use them method in their plots. In our project area, farmers mainly growing common beans and maize, along with bananas, coffee, and other vegetables. The biggest pest issue are fall armyworm for maize, and for common beans, aphids, foliage beetle, and anthracnose, a fungal disease. We were excited to see that farmers have suggested their own formulations, including mixing botanical species and using rabbit urine for 2021 season. Farmers choosing to use rabbit urine and the various mixtures of Tephrosia, Tithonia, Pyrethrum, Neem, and Osmum. Working together with the farmers group, we evaluated those approaches by collecting insect pests to identify which extract and intervention had the best potential. The results left us optimistic and ready to plan for the next cropping season. We are excited about using phones. This year we received smartphones as learning tools. We have success stories. We share video for farmers to watch. We managed to conduct a Zoom meeting with farmers. Farmers were able to share information and the picture and the voice. Most trained, inspired farmers made their own video on the use and potentials of botanical. Because of this project, the use of pesticidal plants is now being practiced more in the areas. Farmers also received training to prepare various clips and connect them to get a film that other farmers will watching and get some messages. They do this by using KineMaster application.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome again to our People's Food Summit segment for 2023. I am here with my dear friend and colleague from the Southern African region, but mostly coming from South Africa, Vanessa Blake. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, greetings everyone. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for joining us today, Vanessa. I'm just going to quickly and get off the way of Vanessa's session by way of introducing Vanessa, who was born in Johannesburg as Vanessa Black. She has a degree in architecture, which she got at the most prestigious university, honestly, in those days and probably now too, the Witwatersrand University, that we call Wits, because most of us can't say the word well anyway. And then she worked as an architect actually for a little bit, and then diverted to the environmental justice space. So I've met Vanessa through the Seed and Knowledge Initiative of Southern Africa and AFSA, which is an Africa-wide network. And she has worked in various civil society organizations. And in 2017, she joined one of our dear friends and dear organizations that was housing Seed and Knowledge Initiative for a while, called BioWatch South Africa. She's the advocacy, research, and policy coordinator there. So BioWatch was established in 1999 and supports smallholder farmers and works together with other civil society organizations to engage in decision-making, to especially challenge the industrialized food system. And at the same time, not only opposing the food system or challenging the food systems of industrial agriculture, but also introducing the solution that is agroecology as a means of ensuring biodiversity while attaining food and seed sovereignty and social justice. So Vanessa is really welcome to this platform, and we look forward to learning from your wisdom and your journey, and also just your beautiful mind as an architect and then now an environmental architect. So Vanessa, over to you. Feel free to share your screen and everything.
Thanks. All right, so just a little bit more on BioWatch. We're based in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and we've got an office in Durban and then another office in Matuba. And the Matuba office works directly with smallholder farmers. We've worked in 7 areas in the province for a long time and have been reaching out to other areas more recently through farmer-to-farmer training. And so we have a focus that is working along with smallholder farmers on agroecology, but we then take that learning from the ground, both ourselves and the farmers, into policy spaces at different levels. And Precious asked me to share both on agroecology and food sovereignty, and then the advocacy approach that we have. And just to say upfront that it's very much based in our context in South Africa, which might be very different from our African neighbors because of our particular history, but also very different to other areas of the world. So while I think there's similarities across all regions, but there's also some peculiarities about South Africa. So just to bear that in mind when I'm sharing. So I thought I'd start with the what is agroecology, and to start with the sort of foundation of that, which is ecology, which is a scientific study of the interactions of living things with each other and their relationship with the environment. And ecology as a science has been something that has been growing over the years, from I'd say the 1920s at least. And there's the science of ecology out in the world, but then there's also the science of ecology in terms of agriculture. And so how agroecology developed as over time was that it started with a particular focus on looking at the ecology in fields and the ecology in crop science, and how the living systems in the field interacted. And then it started growing with the development of ecology generally in the world as a science. So over time, it then started looking at not just the field space, but whole farms and then the broader environment. So this focus on agroecology and the relationships between living things and the food that we eat and how we produce the food then started becoming more of a focus in response to the Green Revolution of the 1960s and 70s. So people started saying that there's a real problem with this approach to producing food in the Green Revolution, and that the counter to that is to look at things from a systems perspective and look at the relationships, as opposed to this very this approach that separates everything and just looks at one part of a bigger system and how to, for example, increase production of one crop, and you just focus on that to the exclusion of everything else that is around that crop and the food system that it's in. And as that developed, then in the 1970s, that whole that science expanded to be looking at whole agro ecosystems. So not just one farm, but how farms in a landscape interacted with each other and with the broader social and environmental context. But then so it was very much in a science realm, but then something changed in that in 1996, we had the World Food Summit, the FAO World Food Summit in Rome. And at that time, there was a crisis around food in the world. And small-scale food producers, civil society organizations, grassroots social movements converged on that World Food Summit and held a counter summit. They took over a space and held a counter summit to say that while the FAO was talking about the problems in the world with food insecurity, civil society actually knew that part of the problem, and a very big part of the problem, was the dominance of corporations in the food system, who were dictating how food production happened and were pushing this Green Revolution approach. And so that groundswell of social movements then started advocating with the leadership of La Via Campesina, the international peasant movement that links farmers and food producers around the globe. They started advocating together for this concept of food sovereignty and put that on the international agenda. And at that World Food Summit as well, that social movement galvanized and said, we need to come together as a movement and start looking at ways in terms of how we can promote food sovereignty. And they established something called the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty and started really organizing. And following that, in 2007, the social movements gathered at Nieleni in Mali and made and had a conference on food sovereignty and what it meant and why it was important. And they wrote something together called the Declaration of Nyelane on Food Sovereignty. And that's a really important document to look at. It really is something that holds to this day about what we are trying to do and what food sovereignty is and why it's so needed. Soon after that, with the advocacy from those social movements, they put pressure onto this committee on something called the Committee on World Food Security, which has been running in the UN for many, many years. It's a long-standing committee of the UN that is supposed to deal with food insecurity in the world. And they really pushed to have a reform of this body to be more inclusive and to start really taking into account the views of people most impacted in the food system, which is the millions of small producers who actually produce most of the food that's eaten in the world and the people that are consuming that food. So that was a really key point. And then a follow-up on the meeting on food sovereignty in Nyelane in 2015, another meeting was held, this time looking at agroecology. And so agroecology, okay, let me come back to that. Agroecology was really positioned at that meeting as the pathway to achieve food sovereignty going forward. So what is this thing called food sovereignty? And most people are very aware of food security and what that is, and the definition of food security has been updated more recently to include these four pillars, which is availability, access to food, the stability, so sustainable access to food, and utilization, for how people utilize the food that's available and process it and prepare it in a way that's healthy and nutritious. But what the social movement said at that World Food Summit was that the measure of food security is not enough, because food security really was just saying that there's food available in the world, but it doesn't say whether one can actually access it. And increasingly, and particularly in South Africa, we have plenty of food. We produce more than enough. We, in fact, produce 120% of the calorific needs of people in the country. But a third of our people are food insecure, either hungry or don't have sustained access to food. And one has to say, why is that? And the why is what social movements and small producers were saying, is that there's power inequities in this world, and the corporations who are increasingly producing food and getting involved in all aspects of the food value chain, as it's called, from the inputs to control over land, to control over the processing, the transport, the retailing, all of that until it gets to you. That's all dominated more increasingly by corporations who are saying how it should happen. And so what happens then is, if you don't have money, you can't access that formal food system and you remain food insecure. So this is why social movements have been advocating for food sovereignty, and that says that it's the right of all peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food, not necessarily this globalized diet that's spreading, and that food should be produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, i.e. agroecology, and should have the right to define their own food and agriculture systems and not have it dictated according to a profit motive where you're being told what to grow, how to grow it, with what inputs, with what seed, so that someone else can make profits. So it's really putting people at the center of the food system. And so food sovereignty has these pillars that are important, that can ensure that there is food sovereignty. So first of all, that the focus is on food for people, not producing food for profit. And the food people need. Also recognizing that a lot of people are can't access food due to conflict, due to many things that prevent their access, but that food is a right. It should be a universal right, and that we need to put that as a priority. It should value food producers and put them at the center as well. And to do that, it should work with nature. So put agroecology into practice. It's all about building knowledge and skills and putting control locally. And so to achieve all these things that are food, to achieve food sovereignty and all these parts of food sovereignty, it's really about localizing food systems. And if you read the declaration, it also has a very key focus on small producers, because it's small producers that are in communities. It's small producers that are responding to local needs. It's small producers that are interacting with the environment and taking care of the environment at a local level. So it's not just about the environment in the field, but the wider environment, and recognizing that food production is often intrinsically linked with the wider environment. So it's not just about producing one crop and producing an excess of that one crop, but it's about how the crop interacts with the culture, what wild foods might be available in that environment, what other things are in that broader environment that communities use. So often one forgets about the building materials, the craft materials, the medicine that's in that wider environment. So food sovereignty and agroecology is saying we need to take care of all of that and see ourselves within that broader environment, not one species that's in control and just tweaking one aspect to optimize it for our own use. It's also recognizing that there's other beings in the environment other than us. So I'm taking some short excerpts from much longer documents just to say then how social movements and producers globally see agroecology as a tool for food sovereignty. So this is from the declaration from 2015. So it's that everyone agreed that agroecology is a key element in the construction of food sovereignty, and that it's practiced by small producers that generate local knowledge, promote social justice, nurture identity and culture, and strengthen the economic viability of rural areas in particular. And these territories that people are in that are often left out of other economic systems, the bigger economic system. And very fundamentally, therefore, agroecology is political because it requires us to challenge and transform the structures of power in society so that seeds, biodiversity, land, territory, water, knowledge, culture, and the commons are in the hands of the people who feed the world and who take care of it and have been taking care of it for a very long time. Also in the document, it speaks about how agroecology is a way of life and the language of nature. So it's learning from nature, it's embedded in nature. And that's why it's part of, or agroecology includes the science of ecology. So it's really seeing, respecting, and learning from the natural way that nature provides things and does things. And because of that, it's not a set of technologies that you can apply in the same way everywhere. And it's also not just focused on production practices, but rather it's about principles. So extracting and learning principles from what we observe about nature, and then taking those principles and applying that in the field, but also in the way that we interact, in the way that we develop our food systems at local level and the food system in general. And so agroecology is really reflecting the local culture and the local colors. And I love the way they describe this in the document about putting one's own color and reality into the way one practices agroecology and respecting Mother Earth and our common shared values. So from the advocacy of social movements and this really strong upswelling to influence the UN structures that deal with food, the FAO and the Committee on World Food Security. The FAO started acknowledging agroecology as one way of producing food. Unfortunately, we want to see it as the way that, we really want a complete transformation. But in the acknowledgement of agroecology, these 10 elements were developed by FAO with a lot of input from social movements and producers. And so this is taking some of the principles that one learns from nature, such as diversity, creating synergy, being efficient. So not, having zero waste, because everything in nature can become food for something else. It's about recycling nutrients. So there's those general elements that are common, or principles that are common, but it's also resilience, and then the very important emphasis on putting the knowledge of food producers and local communities centrally, of having human and social values, so rights, a very strong rights-based approach, respecting culture and food traditions, but then also starting to look at some of the systemic issues around, you need responsible governance, and then talking about a circular and solidarity economy as a different way of organizing food systems. So there were these 10 elements, and then I've just highlighted the ones that are very general principles that apply wherever you are thinking about agroecology. But then in 2019, and again through the massive advocacy from civil society and producers and social movements, the Committee on World Food Security agreed to have agroecology as a particular work stream in the CFS. Unfortunately, with a lot of lobbying again from the big exporting countries and the corporations that they work with, this was then changed and tweaked to be agroecological and other innovative approaches, so that they could include some of the other approaches that the industry is advocating. But the scientific body, which is an independent scientific body and reviews all the research, including people's own experiences from the ground, then came up with 13 principles. And these 13 principles are for agroecology are looking at not just the field again, but looking at the whole food system. And what's really nice is Gleesman, who's a very well-respected academic, then took these 13 principles and has put it into a sort of framework for transition. So what was very important about that HLPE report was it said that even though there's this whole basket of innovative approaches, that agroecology is the innovative approach for complete transformation of the food system that we need, but that there can be steps. So some of the one principle in particular, input reduction, was something that was really argued, but that is a first step of an incremental transitioning of the food system. So Gleesman's associated these principles to this transformation level. So if you're looking at an incremental approach, it's decreasing your reliance on inputs, particularly toxic inputs, substituting the agroecological alternatives for phasing out the conventional practices and substituting agroecology. Then you start moving from the field or the farm and looking at the whole agroecological system, the agroecosystem. And then you start really transforming the wider food system. So starting to connect the producers and the consumers or eaters, looking at alternative food networks, how you reorganize the food system, and then building a new global food system that's fundamentally based on justice and equity. And to do that, one has to have participation and look at a regional approach. So if you look at some of the principles like synergy and co-creation of knowledge is sitting at the center because it applies to all levels. But otherwise, things like the soil health, animal health, that's more at the farm level, and then you start applying the principles more broadly up from the farm, from the very roots to the wider food system. So in this transformation, what is it that we're trying to transform? Excuse me. So for us, what we're trying to transform or trying to dismantle is the industrialized food system. And why are we trying to do that? For us, the way we see it is that this industrialized food system is at the center of a whole lot of intersecting crises. So we've spoken a bit about the concentration of corporate power, which is increasingly concentrating and becoming more and more difficult to pinpoint. So now we're seeing almost a dematerialization where it's data companies that are becoming the powerful corporates in the food system, not even those big chemical companies like Bayer Monsanto. It's the hazardous chemicals that are used in the industrialized food system and the super pests and super weeds these are creating. It's biodiversity and agrodiversity loss. So broadly, the industrialized food system is taking out ecosystems, whole ecosystems, to focus on production of monocrops. So that's destroying the wider biodiversity, but we've also seen huge loss in terms of agricultural diversity of seed, and particularly livestock is even more threatened as we focus on just a few varieties in the industrial food system that meet, that they're more around productivity, making it easier to transport, or with animals, the ones that have softer meat and have, put on meat quickly on the diets that they provided. Then food insecurity, poor health and nutrition, as I've already spoken about in South Africa. It's very obvious that the industrial food system, which is dominant in South Africa because of our history, we have a dual system where we have smallholders that are very, very marginalized and have been displaced from land, and a very active, powerful industrial food system. And despite having that, and despite having hectares and hectares of monocultures focusing on food production, we have this ill health. And it's not just food insecurity, but it's poor nutrition. So we have a crisis of malnutrition in South Africa. So it's very clear that the industrial food system is not delivering. And then the biggie is climate change. So for a very long time, the focus in climate change has been more on the energy system, and the contribution of food was really focused on on-farm emissions. And I'll come back to a graphic on this. But more recently, the IPCC has acknowledged that if you look at the food system as a whole and the way that it is organized, that it has a huge contribution to climate change. And together with biodiversity loss, those two things are reinforcing each other. And then in South Africa, I've highlighted it in orange, this issue of contested land, water, and seed. And it's been a very particular issue. Here, the access to land and access to water to produce. But I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue in Africa in general, as we're seeing land grabbing for mining of transition, the minerals that are required for the energy transition, land grabbing for that's destroying people's land and water. And then an increasing problem around seed. And we're seeing seed harmonization laws that are being taken away from the national level to the regional level, and to the level of the AU that is looking at basically harmonizing it in a way that farmer-led seed systems are being marginalized. And the focus is really just on those corporate seeds and the sale and the exchange of corporate seed, and farmer seed systems are being criminalized and prevented. So without that land, water, and seed, you can't also get out of the system. You know, to strengthen agroecology and farmer production, especially small scale production, you need those fundamental resources. So coming to the advocacy, as I said earlier, we, as BioWatch, our small organization, we really like to link what's happening on the ground, what we learn from small producers, and to bring small producers into the policy space and to work from that, out from that. And we started working with farmers in the early days of BioWatch in our response to genetically modified organisms that had been introduced in South Africa. So with our highly industrialized systems, we've also had GMOs for a very long time. And we've really been trying to confine and push back against the spread of GMOs. But unfortunately, at the moment, our staple crops, particularly maize, which people eat predominantly, the most part of people's diet in South Africa is maize. And that's almost, it's in the 90+% genetically modified. And so both our sort of work with farmers to support agroecology started in response to this push to have GMOs foisted across the food system in South Africa. So just some glimpses of our work with farmers on the ground. So we start with food first at the household level, household food gardens and rain-fed crops as the fundamental basis of food security. And as you can see, our focus is very much on diverse intercropping, taking care of the water. So most of the areas we work in, people are on marginalized land that they've been pushed into through forced removals. And very often there's no running water. People rely on rainwater, and what little water they have, they recycle. And these are really the elements, some of the elements of the agroecology. So in the fields as well, the picture on the bottom, it's very diverse intercropped fields of a diversity of grains, a diversity of legumes, and then all sorts of traditional pumpkins or squash species or varieties. So it's a Three Sisters approach, but our own local version of it. And underpinning all of that is soil health, building healthy soil through composting, through leaving in situ residues, and more recently, the introduction of bio-inputs, so increasing the microbial content, the beneficial microbes in the soil to ensure soil health. We don't kill pests, we don't use strong pesticides, even sort of homemade sprays are last resort. It's really about that good healthy soil for good healthy plants, and then having a diversity of insects through leaving natural space, encouraging natural predators, and using natural pest repellent plants that come from the environment, so strong smelling plants that the insects don't like. The other basis is farmer varieties of seed and the revival of crops that have been lost, such as the millets and sorghum, which are much better adapted to the environment that we're in. And then also recognizing the importance of wild foods, wild fruits in the diets of rural people and the wider environment that needs to be conserved. So on the seed side, as I said, reviving traditional and cultural foods, those diverse farmer varieties, and really making sure that households are seed secure, and promoting household seed banks, and then through a network of farmers in a local area and between areas, then having almost like a networked communal seed bank through each other and through each other's household seed banks, to ensure seed sovereignty as a fundamental basis for food sovereignty. Because if you don't have control over your seed and what you plant, you can't ensure your food sovereignty. Then In our province, we have a whole lot of networking processes. So we've just last week finished our annual agroecology farmer fair, where farmers can exchange seed, they exchange knowledge, importantly, about how you use the seed, process it, and prepare it. We also focused on the revival of our small grains, millets, particularly the millets and sorghum, which, as I said, are far more climate resilient. And with climate change, there might be impact, or there is going to be impact on where maize can be grown. So it's really important that people revive grains that they used to rely on for food security. Also, very importantly, in this re-looking at the food system and localizing the food system, the issue of appropriate technology. And in South Africa, with this predominant corporate industrial agriculture, there's been absolutely no focus on appropriate technology for small producers. So from the most fundamental aspect of a small-scale milling machine that can process your maize so that you can eat it yourself, that level of technology is really, it's very limited in South Africa. And I know in other countries there's a much bigger emphasis on it, but this is the situation that we're sitting with, where the power is all centered in the industrial system. So we need much more focus on that. And also more discussion on youth, making local food systems and agroecology viable for youth. And we also then not only network farmers from different areas, but we've also established a provincial agroecology platform to link organizations working with small producers who are aligned in values and approaches. And so we see each other's work and we learn from each other, but also as a platform to discuss the advocacy issues that are coming up, such as the issue around seed, because we've also had a process in South Africa around changing our seed law, or our seed law being completely focused on the commercial space. And yeah, that's sort of outlawing of exchange among small producers. And we just at a stage now, after years of arguing about the Plant Improvement Act and the Plant Breeders' Rights Act, of discussing regulations that will have some exemptions for smallholders. And this week there's a consultation on that. So yeah, how we discuss that and understand those laws on the ground. Yeah, so a lot of exchange. And then we also have done a similar thing at the national level, where we have a national agroecology platform. And I've put this slide in because on one hand, we're building from the ground and trying to build our movement in South Africa around agroecology and strengthen that, which is a difficult thing with such marginalized small producers. But really, the crux, or the bottleneck, or the pinch in the hourglass sits with our national governments. So one can talk about policy at the international, the global level, and one can build on the ground. But the interface between those two spheres is our national government. And so it's very important that we engage with our national governments. And in South Africa, we've been trying all sorts of strategies, and it's very difficult because national governments, also often the departments operate in silos. You know, they work on their area, but to transform the food system, we need agriculture, we need water, we need health, we need how land is allocated, we need departments that deal with the economy and development, etc. So it's a lot of people to be advocating to and engaging with, and we try to do that in different ways. So on one hand, as our individual organization, we try and engage with government departments, and this was this year the head of our gene bank and the officials that are particularly engaged in farmer seed systems and giving life to right to exchange seed and biodiversity conservation of our agricultural diversity. We had a delegation come and visit one of the farmers and look at the seed they have and the varieties they have. But again, that department is very small and under-resourced, so the resources going to preserving the agricultural diversity and supporting farmer-led seed systems is very, very tiny in comparison to the resources and focus on the industrialized food system and supporting, the commercial farmers, the retailers, etc., that are all involved in that system. And therefore, there's a group of organizations in the country that have been working on agroecology for some time. A lot of them are organizations that were advocating around land reform and have recognized that you can't speak about land reform without speaking about how people will use the land, and that commercial industrial agriculture is not the right way to use land because of all the impacts it has. Also on farm workers. In that previous picture I showed, I didn't talk about the terrible impact on farm workers that are in the industrial system. So organizations are also looking at that aspect, and we've come together as a core group of organizations to try and look at these different parts of the industrial food system that need to change. So access to land and water, working on pesticides, and some of the organizations have formed something called Unpoison that specifically looks at the legislation around approval of pesticides and agricultural chemicals. Particularly in South Africa, we have a very outdated system that's from the 1940s still, and where the industry has a key role in what gets approved, what the regulations are around in the use of those chemicals, and where we are still importing at least 57 highly hazardous pesticides that have been banned in Europe. We're still using in our country, and farm workers then are bearing the brunt of that and have very precarious working conditions, mostly women who are affected and often are dismissed when they get ill with no social recourse or support structures. So there's a whole group working on that, and we're hoping to have a pesticide tribunal next year as a collective to highlight some of the stories from the ground of people in the industrial system, and also smallholders who are buying chemicals off the street, and another whole area that doesn't seem to be regulated at all. And then this was a project that we have been working on this year as a collective, to say that because in South Africa we're doing a lot around climate change in the policy space at the moment. So there's a interministerial body that also includes input from industry and civil society that's looking on what a just transition means in South Africa across all aspects of South African life. There's also a climate change bill that's on the table, and that climate change bill will require all sectors that have big impacts on climate change in the country to come up with adaptation and mitigation plans and responses. And so our collective then has started a process of trying to speak about and explore and put in place some of our own principles on what a just transition in the food system would look like. And we've brought in informal and formal workers, academics that are also interested in this, and food producers and also consumers I left out. But to try and say, what does that just transition need to look like? And across those sectors at the dialogue that was held last month, everyone supports agroecology as the way to transform our food system, and a fundamental approach to transforming our food system that will ensure that we really do have a right to food in practice, and not just on paper in our constitution, but that actually people are experiencing a right to food in the country. So yeah, so a lot a lot of work at that national level, attempts to engage the different departments. We've also written a letter to the minister and addressed it, copied it to our portfolio committee, our research council, saying, why isn't there more research into agroecology? Because we keep getting told that agroecology doesn't work and it can't feed the country. This narrative that agroecology can't feed the world, when in fact agroecology is feeding the world. But there's no comparative research in different contexts or in our context on that. So just trying to engage at many different levels, also with our National Planning Commission, to say that they need to take this seriously, and that there's a groundswell of people in the country that are looking to this as an appropriate and an appropriate approach that shouldn't just be seen as like a side thing, because that's what's been happening quite a lot, is that agroecology is just approached as another form of practice on the ground that's sort of like a side or a niche way of doing things that's aimed at niche markets and niche exports, just as a sort of tweaking the practices on the farm. But we see it completely differently as this broader food system transformation approach. So from the national, we also work with a whole lot of African networks that are also advocating agroecology. We have Rural Women's Assembly in Southern Africa that links rural women from in our country and across the region. We have African Biodiversity Network that BioWatch is a part of and helped, was one of the founding partners in, that's looking at biodiversity also from cultural rituals perspective and an African way of doing things, and reviving the knowledge and the practices and the seed related to that. And then, as Precious mentioned, we are partners in something called the Seed and Knowledge Initiative, which was a 4-country initiative: South Africa, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, looking particularly at seed as that foundation to food sovereignty, and how to understand and strengthen farmer-led seed systems at the local level, which is really about sharing knowledge, and knowledge that's really being pushed out by this industrial system. And farmers on the ground in South Africa are constantly told that their ways are backward, that their gogo seeds, their grandmother seeds are useless, etc. So it's building up the appreciation of the deep knowledge that people on the ground have and the importance of it. And then we all are linked into the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, which links all our movements on the continent and takes our experiences from the ground into the international policy space, both at the Africa-wide level and more globally. And so these are just some images from our Seed and Knowledge Initiative. We had a gathering particularly focusing on farmers' rights to save and exchange and develop their own seed systems, our own seed systems, linked to things like the UN drop, and then also how in the plant treaty that could be strengthened. And we brought all our knowledge and engaged with respected academics in Africa, in our countries, that are also working with us in research institutions and on the ground, helping to improve our systems, but really foregrounding the importance of farmer knowledge as being equal to scientific knowledge. And then some images from something that we participate in also as the Seed and Knowledge Initiative, called the Healthy Soil, Healthy Food Initiative, which has looked at soil health as a very fundamental part of agroecology and part of creating healthy food, and where we've exchanged soil health practices and learning, and also through that project between Sky and AFSA, introduced the bioinputs training in our communities to improve soil health, the microbial health in soil, with really simple farmer accessible ways of doing this. And we've put together information. You can see Precious standing there holding an information booklet that was developed out of all our collective learnings. And then last year and this year, AFSA has been AFSA have been taking all this knowledge and this grounding about soil health, about all of our activity as an agroecological movement into the climate space, so into the Conference of the Parties on Climate Change, trying to engage with the African representatives who are in that space, talking about agroecology as a key solution to the adaptation problem that Africa is going to face. And then I've mentioned the Committee on World Food Security. So that's an image at the top of that committee with all the countries that sit together. And what's really important about this particular UN body is that civil society representation, which is autonomously organized. So the UN doesn't say who's in that space from civil society and indigenous people. It's the civil society and indigenous people's mechanism organizes from the ground up and brings its own policy responses to whatever is being discussed. And the image below is us engaging with our African ambassadors and representatives to see what they were going to be and what they are negotiating around to try and support that. And often not always in agreement. So I think that's one of the key areas of work, and why I showed that image of the hourglass, because in these international spaces, and this is one, and our colleagues operate in many of them. So there's the Convention on Combating Desertification. There's the Biodiversity Convention that people are going to engage with in the next few months. There's the plant treaty negotiations. There's the climate space. There's many spaces where civil society is organizing around, but at the end of the day, it's our national representatives that go and negotiate there, and they take their mandate from the national government. So that point in the hourglass is really where we need to do a lot of work to show, or to have our viewpoints taken into what is presented by our national governments in these policy spaces. And this is just the one where we do have a direct seat, but a lot of them, there is no direct seat. It's really reliant on advocacy. Civil society in the civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism to the CFS, and around the globe have really been advocating in opposition to the UN Food System Summit in many cases, critiquing the UN Food System Summit as being a multi-stakeholder space instead of a multilateral space. So it's a space where there's no accountability. So our national representatives go there and they negotiate and they put plans on the table, but they don't account directly back to us. There's no mechanisms of accountability. And there's no differentiation in the Food System Summit space around the power that corporations have. So it's sort of people come together, they make plans, you can't hold them accountable, it's attracting funds to it, and corporations have a very big voice. So it's also based on the idea very often of public-private partnerships, so where corporations aren't being held to account but are sort of setting the agenda. So there's been a groundswell of movement, and also in Africa where we've networked across Africa to say that we reject that multilateral space where corporations are having an undue influence. And we're really saying that we want food sovereignty based on agroecology, and advocating for that to be recognized. And then I wanted to say something just about something that underpins our advocacy, whether it's on the ground with farmers or in the national space, our provincial spaces up to the global level, is this question of evidence and narratives. And as I've said, we're always asked to prove agroecology. The onus is always put on us, like, prove it works, prove that it feeds, it can compete with industrial agriculture to feed the world. And often we put in a tailspin of trying to do these scientific methods to have like empirical evidence, get things published, and that whole system it sort of takes us off track, and it invalidates the experiences and voices from the ground. So one of the things that we do as an organization, and we try and also do through Seed and Knowledge Initiative, etc., is to put the producer's voice back on the table from their own experience and talk about, so for example, the image on the right is a book that we released this year, just talking where farmers spoke about how they managed through the COVID pandemic, but then also in our province where we had very heavy flooding that followed a period of drought, where we had social unrest and people were cut off from food supplies. And how did farmers on the ground who were practicing agroecology live through that? And there are amazing stories of how agroecology provided resilience to these shocks in the food system and disruptions in their lives. And that's really what we're going to face with climate change, is these extremes of weather, food shortages, food prices of spiking very badly. And agroecology really offers a solution to many of those things, although one can't only rely on that at the farm level, but also we have to respond at that global level to mitigate climate change, because there's some things you can't be resilient to, if you're having a cyclone, etc. But then also just sharing voices. So also through the CSIPM, sharing voices on the ground about what's happening in COVID and how the food system is broken, and putting forward solutions to how to fix it, based on agroecology and food sovereignty. And then also as an organization, we put out fact sheets. So again, this is the graphic I was talking about on climate change, just acknowledging the huge impact that the food system has on climate change, that 1/3 of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system, because it's a whole system that moves bits and pieces of food around the world, moves soya from Latin America to feed animals in Europe, which then gets processed and then gets dumped in our economies, sometimes at prices below what people here can produce. There's masses of food waste. There's land use change to do this monocrop agriculture. And there's all this transport and packaging, and then the unseen part also that even this graphic's not talking to is the computing energy that's now going into these big data systems that are telling farmers what to plant, when to plant, how to plant, etc., and gathering data in real time. And so a lot of our work also as an organization in our national space is to debunk the narratives, and reclaim our narrative. So it's debunking things like climate smart agriculture, which are being pushed by the industry, because then it leaves a gap for this data approach to microdosing fertilizers, microdosing pesticides, to selling you genetically modified crops that can be herbicide sprayed so that you don't have to do weeding, and the impact of that, and conservation agriculture to some extent also, where although there's some good practices in conservation agriculture around soil health and the focus on soil health, there's a hidden agenda also that we found in our country, where smallholders are being introduced to pesticides and introduced to herbicides and fertilizers and GM seeds through conservation agriculture projects. So, these things sometimes might be good for transitioning these huge scale monocultures, these corporate owned farms, to be a little bit more environmentally sustainable, but it doesn't address the whole system. It doesn't address the social inequities, the labor issues, the control issues, the power issues in the food system. And so we have to call those false solutions out when we see them. And that's where I'll end. And I hope that I've covered all the things. One could talk about these things for days, but that's where I'm at.
Vanessa, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely amazing.
My name is Method Gundidza. I come from Bikita district in Masvingo, province of Zimbabwe. I am the director of Ethlor Foundation, an organization based in South Africa, working in two provinces, Limpopo and Mpumalanga here in South Africa, and also in my home district, Bikita, in Zimbabwe. I will say a bit about my background. I trained as a chartered accountant and joined this organization, Ethlor Foundation, as the finance manager in 2013. Over the years, I had the opportunity of being part of a training on earth jurisprudence that is facilitated by the Gaia Foundation. Having gone through this training, which involves spending time in nature, lots of nature experiential processes, spending time with elderly men and women to share, to hear as they share their knowledge and their understanding of how nature works, how they understand their ecological systems. I evolved from the role of finance manager to getting more and more involved in programmatic work and starting my own personal journey with my own elders in my own family and in the wider community around my area, and in the process actually initiating the work that we are doing in Bikita around reviving our traditional seeds, reviving our traditional rituals, ceremonies, to ask for rain, to celebrate first fruits. We call it mushosho in our local language. And then going forward into protecting sacred sites in the area, which is where we are right now. This for me is important work, which I do, yes, as director I do earn a salary,
But I have really moved beyond seeing my work as a job, because there is so much transformation that has happened to me personally, just getting to understand how our elders and our ancestors understood how everything is connected in nature. When we talk about permaculture, we talk about agroecology. These are like scientific terms that come in most cases from the West, describing how they understand agriculture and how agriculture needs to be done successfully and sustainably. In Earthlore, we never use the word agroecology nor permaculture when we are working with the communities. We use it amongst ourselves as we understand what it means to us. But when we are working in the community, we talk about how do we farm in good ways, in ways that do not destroy the land. And when we start talking about that, that's when we start to, with the elders, bring back the knowledge of the importance of seed at household level, and how seed is key for each and every household to have their own seed within their own control, how to save seeds, how to multiply seeds, and how to get a diversity of seed from other fellow community members. In the process, as I've explained already, we see how seed transcends the field and the forest and the mountains and the rivers, as these are the ones that connect the people to the sacred sites for the rituals and all that. And then we see that we can't talk about just agroecology. It's too narrow, as you have said. It's narrow. It speaks only to agriculture. But agriculture in this context is seen as a part of the whole ecosystem, as a part of the whole culture and behavior and how people are organized around each other and around their land and their food. The land they cultivate and the land that's common, including the rivers. And this is what being ecologically sound means to me. When we talk just about food, seed and food, and we end there, it is narrow, number one, and number two, it's hard to bring communities into concrete and sustainable actions when we talk only about seed and food, because it's a much bigger topic. It's a topic that involves how people relate to each other. It's a topic that relates to how communities relate to each other, how they relate to their land, how they relate to their foods, how they relate to everything. So my experience in seeking communities to shift is when you embed these topics of seed and food into the whole community system of seed, of food, of rituals, of ceremonies, of sacred sites, of the wider landscape. In this way, we challenge the community to approach seed and food systemic change work from a much broader perspective. Because some will say we are not short of food. Some will say we are not short of seed. But what is it that goes beyond that? And when we do community dialogues with our elders in the communities that we work with here in South Africa and in Zimbabwe, we see that once we manage to re-establish and revive that cultural, spiritual, and social elements of seed and food, that we excite actions around these topics genuinely and sustainably from the communities. When we bring back millet, as we have done in Zimbabwe, and we bring back the ceremonies of threshing and winnowing. We bring back the ceremonies of, to ask for rain, to honor first fruits, mushosho, and so on. You start to see a certain level of engagement by community members that this is now not just about food. It goes beyond seed and food nexus only. It touches on all the other elements of the community. And this is the journey that I have walked with all the different communities. We continue to walk this journey with them as now we strengthen the work around sacred sites, how to protect them, what is the use, how do seeds help us to protect these sacred sites, and all the other elements. And this is the work that we are doing with the communities. I have shared with you the work we have done to revive millet. And when we have revived millet, the way we have done so, we start to bring back the ancient wisdom around handling millet. You harvest millet and you put it into tsapi, the traditional storage. After some time, maybe around August, September, when it becomes windy, we go into the threshing and winnowing ceremonies. And then we transfer the grain. Now it is the grain that we have extracted from the processes of winnowing and threshing. We transfer the grain into dura, a traditional storage facility for grain. And then we pick up and select, having selected some seeds in the field during the threshing and the winnowing ceremonies, we also use that as an opportunity to identify other varieties just before the threshing ceremony itself, other varieties of millet that will be stored somewhere, sometimes within the dura, the granary itself, in certain ways, and sometimes in the kitchen for smoking, and sometimes in another storage facility called built outside of the homestead, and it's made of mud. It's a completely sealed structure that is constructed away from home, just in case there is fire and the whole homestead gets burnt. That storage facility is always there to ensure that even if we lose food, we lose grain, we still have the seeds. And that is stored away from the homestead as a backup, as a precautionary measure. So seed is preserved to ensure continuity. And then this is how, even in drought periods, it cannot be accessed. Food can run out, and that storage is not accessed because it is meant to ensure the continuity of farming processes at household level. And these are all wisdoms that our ancestors, and embedded within our traditions of preserving seed and grain, understood very clearly that the two are separate and are handled separately. Protocol and wisdom around that, it's usually when the elders want to take the food or the grain from the granaries or the seed from where it is stored, they either go the real elders, or they choose a young girl, a young boy, and that boy, that girl is asked to go take the grain or take the seed as a way of keeping that purity that seed always carries. Transformation starts when the whole community, number one, is working together as a community. We have revived the structure of the community. The local leaders, traditional leaders are there. The role of women around seed, the role of men around seed and food, all these become clear once again, as they've always been. The role of the spiritual custodians who have the responsibility of asking for rain, blessings and all. You weave the whole community in such a way that it's got structure, it's got roles. Everybody feels empowered, everybody feels inspired to play their role within the community. This is the fertile space where real transformation, real change actually happens. But when we start work around seed and food systems, and maybe sometimes we say work around agroecology, in a way, we start identifying farmers to work with. But even as we do so, we must be clear that this work does not end with isolated farmers. It's got to weave back to the structure of the community so that the narrative of seed and food is seen in the context of a community. And when a whole community gets involved, the next community gets interested. Another next neighboring community gets interested. And this is how farmers get connected into their community. Communities get connected to other communities. And then the spiraling of the work spirals out. It spreads out. And this is how we start touching and speaking about work and impacting at national level. Within the organizations that we work with, partners, like for example, within the Sky Seed and Knowledge Initiative family, we start connecting with other organizations working in other parts of the country, like in your case, working in Hwange, Victoria Falls. The support system is embedded in these networks that we work together. We share experiences. We learn from each other how others are tackling certain topics as facilitators of the work. And then these are also ways that we bring support to the communities that we work with. As we take them to learning exchanges, they feel inspired, they feel affirmed in the work that they are doing, and they do this work. So it's support at organizational level, it's support at community level, and we can't forget the role of the funders, the donors who support this work. We are in receipt of different sources of funds. Some are much more liberal and they allow us. Some of our funders actually don't want to be acknowledged even on our websites. They want to remain anonymous, but they give us money and say, do the work that you do in the manner you do it. We don't interfere, we don't want a log frame, we don't want what, because we understand that systemic changes cannot be represented only in a log frame. So here is the money, do your work, be flexible, and be as creative as you can be. All we want is to get the proof of expenditures, that the money has been spent responsibly, that the money has been used for the purposes that we have agreed, or that you have told us that this is what we are doing. Then we get those kinds of support, and quite honestly, those help us to do the work which involves and involves spirituality, which is work that's sometimes hard to fundraise for, because it's hard to show the connections of how spirituality and ecology connect. But fortunately, we've got funders coming up who understand these these connections. And in participating in certain webinars, in certain forums, certain conferences, where these ideas are shared and are discussed, we also learn from other experiences. I mean, I've had the privilege of going to France twice since 2018 to a conference that brings organizations working around indigenous knowledge and revival of traditional practices from South America, the Amazon, from the Altai of Russia, from here in Africa, from the Caribbeans, and from places like New Zealand, Australia, the Aborigines. And we come together, we share knowledge, we share our experiences, we exchange, and we affirm each other's work, we support each other, we inspire each other. Our work revolves bringing together elders to bring back the wisdom, to bring back the memory and the wisdom of how we work on the land, how we work with the land. There are a lot of challenges around this. Number one is that bringing back traditions is regarded as bringing back, it's said to be archaic. It's said to be demonic work. And yet, when this work is done meaningfully, community members start to recognize that being Christian does not prevent them from honoring their traditions, and they live such a harmonious life between being Christian and being a traditional practitioner. And then we start to experience that there isn't conflict, there is an enhancement of things. And yet, I cannot pretend that this is not. In the end, sometimes we as the change agents, as the facilitators, we also fizzle out, we get tired, we get discouraged. And sometimes you have been fundraising, and it's hard to demonstrate to funders that this is how it will be. And that's a big challenge. If the work doesn't show up, fundraising also doesn't respond positively. One other challenge is that as a change facilitator, I've shared with you how it is key to embed oneself in nature, to embed oneself into the traditions in this work. And yet, when this work happens and happens properly, it is rewarding because it is good for every member of the community. The work around spirituality and custodianship and honoring the land and protecting the land is work that is done by a few people for the majority, in return for nothing. I have become, in a way, an elder before I become an elder, having developed, having grown, having evolved, co-evolved with the communities, co-evolving with the work, co-evolving with the seed and food systems, co-evolving with the landscape. In other words, through this work, we grow together in the whole community of life. As the forests come back and they regenerate, we grow together with the forests. And that brings spiritual growth, social growth. And this is my experience as a facilitator of this work, as an earth jurisprudence practitioner, as a father. It is such a privilege, and I feel very privileged to be in that situation. I also feel very privileged to be sharing this experience with you. Let these stories be heard. This is how we speak to the world. Thank you so much once again, Sis Precious, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Koma Method. Thank you for your amazing rendering and wisdom. To everyone who joined us today on the African segment of People's Food Summit, thank you. And I hope that you'll have an opportunity to share all the presentations that you saw, and to continue spreading the word, and those with resources that you will maybe link up with us at Regeneration International on how you can fund some of our partners and how you can support some of our own work that we do as well. Otherwise, from the African continent to you, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for staying with us and keeping and holding us up in your thoughts and prayers, and in solidarity with the bigger movement across the world. Again, bye and thank you.